In the summer of 1978, a 17-year-old boy walked into the Lone Pine Mountains and never came back. But what nobody knew was that someone watched him go. Someone who kept a terrible secret for 45 years. Before we dive into this mystery, please like, subscribe to the channel, and comment on what you think happened. Your opinion could be the key to understanding this story. The morning started like any other in the small mountain town. The air smelled of pine needles and morning dew, and the mountains stood tall against the pale blue sky like silent guardians. 17-year-old Marcus Chen was different from other teenagers. While his classmates spent their summer mornings sleeping in or hanging out at the local diner, Marcus was obsessed with documenting every plant species in the Lone Pine Range. His weathered notebook was always with him, filled with detailed sketches and observations written in his careful handwriting. That morning, his best friend Sarah watched him pack his backpack on her front porch. She could hear the distinctive sound of his hiking boots scraping against the wooden steps. Marcus had that look in his eyes, the one he got when he was onto something big. His hands trembled slightly as he checked his supplies: water, dried food, his precious notebook, and his camera. "I found something, Sarah," he told her, his voice barely above a whisper. "Something that could change everything." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine despite the warm summer air. There was something different about Marcus that day. Something urgent, something almost frightening in his intensity. "Where exactly are you going?" she asked, watching him adjust the straps on his backpack. Marcus looked up at the mountains, squinting against the morning sun. "Promise me something," he said, avoiding her question. "If anything happens, promise you won't tell anyone what I'm about to show you." What could a 17-year-old boy possibly discover in those mountains that required such secrecy? Sarah made that promise. She had no idea it would haunt her for the next 45 years. Marcus pulled out his notebook and showed her a hand-drawn map, covered in strange symbols and markings that made no sense to her. He pointed to a specific location circled in red ink. "There's a phenomenon up there," he explained, his eyes bright with excitement. "Something that only happens under very specific conditions. I need to document it before—" He stopped mid-sentence, as if he'd already said too much. "Before what?" Sarah pressed. But Marcus just shook his head, closed the notebook, and smiled that familiar, reassuring smile. "I'll be back by sunset. Don't worry." Those were the last words she ever heard him speak. By midnight, when Marcus hadn't returned, Sarah's worry turned to panic. By morning, the entire town was searching. By the end of the week, the official search was called off. Marcus Chen had vanished without a trace, and Sarah carried a secret that would change everything, if she ever found the courage to reveal it. What really happened in those mountains that summer day? And why would a teenage boy need to keep such a dangerous secret? When Marcus Chen didn't return by sunset, his parents called Sarah's house. The phone rang through the quiet evening air, each ring like a hammer against Sarah's chest. She knew. She already knew something was terribly wrong. The search began at dawn the next morning. Sarah stood at the edge of the forest with Marcus's mother, watching dozens of volunteers gather in the town square. The smell of coffee and anxiety mixed in the morning air. Marcus's father, a quiet man who rarely showed emotion, had tears streaming down his face as he handed out copies of his son's photograph to the search teams. Sheriff Thomas Crawford organized the volunteers into groups. His voice was steady and authoritative, but Sarah noticed his hands shaking as he unfolded a map of the Lone Pine Mountains. "The terrain is rough," he told the crowd. "Stay in your groups. Mark any evidence you find, but don't touch it." Sarah wanted to tell them about the map Marcus had shown her. She wanted to point them to that red circle. But she'd made a promise, and something in her gut told her that breaking that promise might put Marcus in even more danger. But what if keeping the secret meant they'd never find him? For 3 days, hundreds of people combed through the mountains. They found nothing. No backpack, no notebook, no trace of Marcus Chen. It was as if the mountains had simply swallowed him whole. On the 4th day, bloodhounds were brought in. They picked up Marcus's scent at the trailhead but lost it completely half a mile up the mountain path. The handler looked confused. "It's like he just disappeared into thin air," he muttered. On day 7, something strange happened. Multiple search volunteers reported seeing mysterious lights dancing on the upper slopes of the mountain, visible only after sunset. Local resident Dorothy Martinez described them as blue-white orbs that moved with purpose, not like any animal or human light source. When Sheriff Crawford investigated, he found nothing. The official report dismissed the sightings as emotional stress and natural phosphorescence. But the rumors had already started. The town's elderly residents began whispering about old legends, stories their grandparents had told about the mountains protecting their secrets, about lights that appeared when the mountains didn't want to be disturbed. Sarah heard these whispers and felt her blood run cold. Had Marcus discovered something the mountains wanted to keep hidden? By day 10, the official search was called off. Sheriff Crawford stood in front of the media cameras, his face aged by exhaustion and grief. "We've done everything we can," he said, his voice breaking. "Without any evidence, any trail to follow." "I'm sorry." Marcus's mother collapsed. Sarah caught her, feeling the woman's body shake with sobs, and in that moment, Sarah made a decision that would shape the rest of her life. She couldn't tell the secret. Not yet. Not until she understood what Marcus had found. That night, Sarah stood at her bedroom window, staring at the dark silhouette of the Lone Pine Mountains. And there, flickering in the distance like a calling signal, she saw them. The dancing lights Marcus had told her about. Whatever he'd discovered up there, it was real. And Sarah knew she would spend the rest of her life searching for the truth. Sarah Mitchell stood in her small cabin laboratory, surrounded by 45 years of obsession. The walls were covered with maps, photographs, and botanical specimens from the Lone Pine Mountains. At 62 years old, her hands weren't as steady as they used to be, but her mind was sharper than ever. Every detail, every plant, every shadow on those mountains, she documented it all. The morning sun filtered through the dusty windows, illuminating jars of preserved plants lining the shelves, each one labeled with precise dates and coordinates. Her life's work as a botanist had been a cover, really, a legitimate excuse to return to those mountains again and again, searching for the truth about Marcus Chen. She'd never married, never had children. Her colleagues called her dedicated. Her family called her obsessed. But only Sarah knew the real reason she couldn't move on. The guilt of that promise ate at her every single day for 45 years. What if I'd told them about the map? What if my silence killed him? Her hands trembled as she poured her morning coffee. The liquid was too hot, burning her tongue, but she barely noticed. On her desk lay her latest journal, Volume 47, in a series that documented every expedition into those mountains. She'd found patterns in the vegetation, anomalies in the plant growth, areas where rare species flourished in conditions that made no scientific sense. And she'd seen the lights. God, she'd seen them so many times. Always in the same area, always during specific weather conditions. But every time she got close, the lights would disappear, leaving her standing alone in the darkness with her instruments and her memories. The doorbell rang, pulling her from her thoughts. Sarah rarely had visitors. She'd isolated herself over the years, pushing away anyone who got too close. It was easier that way, easier than explaining why she spent every free moment hiking into the mountains, easier than admitting she was searching for a ghost. Through the window, she saw a young woman with a camera standing on her porch. A journalist, probably. They came sometimes, especially around the anniversary of Marcus's disappearance. Sarah usually sent them away without a word. But something made her open the door this time. Maybe it was the way the morning light hit the mountains. Maybe it was the dream she'd had the night before. Marcus's voice calling to her from somewhere in the peaks. "Dr. Mitchell?" the woman said. "My name is Jennifer Reeves. I'm a documentary filmmaker. I'm here about Marcus Chen." Sarah's heart skipped. "I have nothing to say." "I know." Jennifer pulled out her phone. "But this isn't about an interview. Something happened 3 weeks ago. Something you need to see." On the phone screen, a video played. Hikers in the mountains at night. And there, clear as day, were the dancing lights. But this time, the camera stayed on them long enough to capture their pattern, their rhythm. And in the corner of the frame, barely visible in the darkness, was something else. A backpack, faded and weathered, but unmistakably from the 1970s. Sarah's coffee cup slipped from her hand, shattering on the floor. After 45 years, Marcus's backpack had been found, and with it, questions that would tear open wounds Sarah had spent half her life trying to heal. Was she finally ready to break her promise? And, more importantly, what would she find when she did? The video had exploded across social media like wildfire. Within 72 hours, it had been viewed over 15 million times. Everyone had a theory. Everyone had an opinion. The disappearance of Marcus Chen, forgotten by most of the world for 4 decades, was suddenly the most talked-about mystery on the internet. Jennifer Reeves sat in Sarah's living room, her laptop open on the coffee table. She'd spent 3 weeks researching the case before coming to find Sarah. The filmmaker's dark eyes were intense, passionate. She reminded Sarah of Marcus. That same hunger for truth, that same refusal to accept easy answers. The hikers who found it were college students from Seattle, Jennifer explained, pulling up more footage. They were doing a night hike, testing new low-light cameras. They saw the lights and thought it would make a cool video for their channel. Sarah watched the screen intently. The lights moved in patterns, not random but deliberately, like they were marking something, highlighting something. And there, caught in the artificial lighting of the hikers' equipment, was the backpack. "Did they touch it?" Sarah asked, her voice hoarse. "No. They called the local authorities immediately." Jennifer switched to another video, this one showing the backpack in daylight. A recovery team went up the next morning. And Sarah, they found something inside. She pulled out a plastic evidence bag. Inside was a notebook, weathered by decades of exposure, water-damaged, but somehow preserved enough to be readable. Through the plastic, Sarah could see Marcus's distinctive handwriting. Her hand reached out before she could stop herself. After 45 years, she was looking at Marcus's actual notebook, the one he'd carried that last morning. But something was wrong. This wasn't the same notebook he'd shown her on her porch. That notebook had been half filled with plant sketches and observations. This one was filled with complex diagrams, chemical formulas, and detailed scientific notes that were far beyond what a 17-year-old should have been capable of writing. "The police don't know what to make of it," Jennifer continued. "Some of the formulas in here are so advanced that they sent copies to university researchers. And Sarah, the researchers say some of this work predicted discoveries that weren't made until years, even decades, after Marcus disappeared. How could a teenage boy write scientific theories that wouldn't be discovered for another 40 years? Sarah turned the pages carefully through the plastic, and then she saw it. The map. But it wasn't the same map Marcus had shown her that morning. This one was more detailed, with layer upon layer of information, topographical markings, coordinates, and symbols that seemed to correspond to something biological. Growth patterns, maybe, or migration routes. "There's more," Jennifer said softly. She pulled up an image on her laptop, a close-up of one page from the notebook. "Look at the date on this entry." Sarah's breath caught. The entry was dated August 15th, 1978, 2 weeks after Marcus had disappeared. "That's impossible," Sarah whispered. But even as she said it, her mind was racing. What if Marcus hadn't died on that mountain? What if he'd survived, hiding, researching, documenting something so important he was willing to let the world think he was dead? The sound of her own heartbeat filled her ears. For 45 years, she'd been searching for a body, for closure, for forgiveness. But what if she should have been searching for a survivor? Jennifer leaned forward. "Dr. Mitchell, I need to know. The old police reports mention that you were Marcus's best friend, that you were the last person to see him. Is there anything you remember? Anything he said or did that day that might explain this?" Sarah looked at the notebook, at the map, at those impossible dates, the promise, the secret. 45 years of silence. Was it finally time to speak? Detective Rebecca Crawford wasn't supposed to be working this case. She'd retired from the police force 3 years ago after 30 years of service. But when she saw the viral video of Marcus Chen's backpack, something in her chest tightened. She recognized that case immediately. It was the one that had destroyed her father. Sheriff Thomas Crawford had never recovered from the failed search for Marcus Chen. Every year on the anniversary, he'd drive up to the mountains alone and spend the day searching. Even after he retired, even after the Alzheimer's began to take his memories, the one thing he never forgot was the boy he couldn't find. He died in 2019, and his last words to Rebecca were, "I failed that boy. I failed them all." Now, holding a copy of the mysterious notebook in her hands, Rebecca felt her father's ghost demanding answers. She'd spent 3 days analyzing the evidence, cross-referencing the old case files, and trying to make sense of the impossible timeline. And every thread led back to one person: Sarah Mitchell. Rebecca pulled up to Sarah's cabin just as Jennifer's car was leaving. Through the window, she could see Sarah standing motionless, staring at something on her table. The older woman looked small, fragile, nothing like the determined botanist who'd spent decades hiking those mountains. When Rebecca knocked, Sarah didn't seem surprised to see her. "You're Thomas's daughter," Sarah said quietly. It wasn't a question. "You have his eyes. May I come in?" Sarah stepped aside, and Rebecca entered a room that looked like a conspiracy theorist's dream. Maps covered every wall. Photographs of the mountains taken from dozens of angles and seasons. Charts tracking weather patterns, plant growth, even lunar cycles. This wasn't the home of a scientist. This was the home of someone obsessed. "My father never stopped looking," Rebecca said, turning to face Sarah. Every case he solved afterward, every criminal he caught, none of it mattered to him because of the one case he couldn't close. The one boy he couldn't bring home. Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. "Your father was a good man. He was a broken man." Rebecca pulled out the notebook evidence photos. "These dates, Dr. Mitchell, entries written after Marcus disappeared. Scientific work that shouldn't have been possible for a teenager. The backpack found in an area that was searched multiple times and came up empty." She paused. "This isn't a case of a boy who got lost in the mountains and died. This is something else entirely. What if Marcus Chen chose to disappear?" The silence between them was heavy. Outside, wind rustled through the pine trees, making them whisper like they were sharing ancient secrets. The old case files mentioned that Marcus called someone the night before his final hike, Rebecca continued. The hotel receptionist remembered because it was a long-distance call. Expensive back then. But the phone records were never properly analyzed. "I found them yesterday in the municipal archives." She placed a faded document on the table. A phone bill from July 1978. One number highlighted in yellow. "He called the National Institute of Botanical Research," Rebecca said. "A government facility that was doing classified work at the time. I made some calls. They had a team in this region in summer 1978, installing meteorological and atmospheric monitoring equipment in remote mountain locations." Sarah's face had gone pale. Marcus mentioned something about specific atmospheric conditions. "What else did he mention, Dr. Mitchell?" Rebecca's voice was gentle but firm. "What else did he tell you that day?" Sarah looked at the old phone record, at the maps on her walls, at the 45 years of searching that had brought them to this moment. She'd kept the secret for so long, protected it, honored it. But Marcus's own evidence was telling a different story now, a story that demanded to be told. "He showed me a map," Sarah whispered, "with markings, and he made me promise not to tell anyone if something happened to him." Rebecca leaned forward. Why would a 17-year-old boy need to disappear? What could he possibly have found that was worth giving up his entire life? Sarah's hands trembled as she reached for her own journal. "I think I'm finally ready to find out." News of the backpack discovery spread through the town like a sickness. Within a week, the the small mountain community was split down the middle. Those who wanted answers and those who believed some mysteries were meant to stay buried. The town council called an emergency meeting. The old community center was packed with residents, their faces tense with emotion and old wounds torn open. Mayor Patricia Herrera stood at the podium, trying to maintain order as voices rose in heated argument. "We need to respect the sacred nature of these mountains," shouted Thomas Whitehorse, an elder from the local indigenous community. His grandfather had been one of the original inhabitants of the region, and his family had maintained traditional ceremonies in the mountains for generations. "These lands have protected our secrets for thousands of years. The lights, the mysteries, they're not meant for outsiders to exploit." "My brother disappeared up there," countered Maria Gonzalez, her voice breaking. "You want to talk about sacred? What about sacred closure? What about families who've suffered for decades?" The argument reflected something deeper than just Marcus Chen's case. The town had always existed in a delicate balance between preserving its cultural heritage and facing its difficult history. The annual Mountain Festival, celebrated for generations, had always been more than just a tourist attraction. It was a tradition rooted in respect for the natural cycles of the region. Cycles that the older residents insisted were not meant to be scientifically analyzed or understood. Sarah sat in the back of the room, watching the community tear itself apart. Beside her, Rebecca took careful notes, while Jennifer filmed everything with a small camera. The documentary filmmaker had told Sarah that morning, "The truth isn't just about what happened to Marcus. It's about what this community has been protecting, or hiding, for generations." But what truth was worth destroying an entire town's peace? Old Gloria Chen, Marcus's grandmother, stood up slowly. The room fell silent. At 93 years old, she rarely spoke in public anymore. But when she did, people listened. She'd been the one who taught Marcus about medicinal plants as a child. She'd been the one who first noticed his unusual gift for understanding the natural world. "My grandson saw things others couldn't see," she said, her voice thin but steady. "Not with his eyes, with his spirit. The old ones in my family, we have stories about people like Marcus, people who could hear what the mountains were saying." She looked directly at Sarah. "And people who promised to protect that knowledge." Sarah felt every eye in the room turn to her. Her throat went dry. How did Gloria know about the promise? "The festival," Gloria continued, "it's not just a celebration. It marks the return of something rare, something that only comes every 45 years. My grandmother told me," her grandmother told her, "the dancing lights appear, the rains come, and the mountain reveals its medicine." "Medicine?" Rebecca stood up. "Mrs. Chen, are you saying Marcus was searching for some kind of medicinal plant?" Gloria's eyes were distant, lost in memory. "He told me, 3 days before he went to the mountain, that he'd figured out the pattern, that he understood why the old ceremonies happened when they did. He was so excited, said he could help people, save lives." Her voice broke. "I told him to be careful. I told him there were people who wouldn't want him to share what he found." The room erupted in whispers. Jennifer's camera captured it all. The shock, the fear, the realization spreading through the crowd like ripples in water. "You're saying someone might have wanted him silenced?" Mayor Herrera asked, her voice barely audible above the growing noise. "I'm saying," Gloria replied, fixing Sarah with an intense stare, "that my grandson found something powerful, something that could change lives. And sometimes, when people find things that valuable, they have to make impossible choices to protect them." Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance. Sarah looked out the window and saw storm clouds gathering over the Lone Pine Mountains, dark, heavy, moving with unnatural speed. The 45-year cycle. It was happening again. The storm hit that night with a violence nobody had predicted. Meteorologists were baffled. The system had formed seemingly out of nowhere, circling over the Lone Pine Mountains like it was tethered there. Wind howled through the town, rattling windows and tearing branches from trees. Rain fell so hard it sounded like gravel hitting the roofs. Sarah stood at her window, watching the mountains disappear behind sheets of rain. But she wasn't looking at the storm. She was looking for the lights. And then, through the chaos of wind and water, she saw them. Blue-white orbs dancing across the upper slopes, visible even through the downpour. They moved in the same pattern Marcus had described 45 years ago. Her phone rang. "Rebecca, are you seeing this?" "The lights," Sarah breathed. "They're back." "I've been going through my father's old notes," Rebecca said, her voice tense with excitement and fear. He documented similar storm patterns, always in late summer, always localized over the mountains. But Sarah, the dates. He marked dates going back 100 years, and they all fall into the same cycle. Every 45 years, almost to the day. Sarah's mind was already making connections. She ran to her desk, scattering papers until she found her own weather journals. 45 years of meteorological data. She'd documented every storm, every unusual weather event, but she'd never plotted them on a timeline. Her hands shook as she began marking dates. 1933, 1978, 2023, a perfect cycle. "Gloria was right," Sarah whispered. "This isn't random. It's a natural phenomenon, something predictable." "But what does it mean?" Rebecca asked. "What happens during these storms?" Sarah closed her eyes, thinking back to that last morning with Marcus. What had he said? Something about specific atmospheric conditions, about documenting a phenomenon before. Before what? The answer hit her like lightning. "Bioluminescence," she said. Marcus talked about plants that could glow. But not just glow, produce light as a response to specific environmental triggers. Most bioluminescent organisms are in the ocean. But if there were plants in these mountains that only bloomed under these exact conditions, they'd only be visible every 45 years, Rebecca finished, during these storms. Not just visible. Sarah was pulling books from her shelves now, her scientific mind racing ahead. Accessible. If these plants only bloomed during specific atmospheric pressures, humidity levels, electrical conditions that only occur during these storms, then they'd be nearly impossible to study under normal circumstances. Through the phone, she could hear Rebecca typing rapidly. "I'm looking at Marcus's notebook photos again. These formulas, Sarah, some of them look like they're related to plant biochemistry. Specifically, the production of medicinal compounds. What if Marcus discovered plants that could cure diseases, but only if you knew exactly when and how to find them?" The implications crashed over Sarah like the storm outside. No wonder Marcus had been so secretive. No wonder he'd made her promise. If he'd discovered rare medicinal plants in these mountains, plants that only revealed themselves every 45 years, and if the wrong people found out. "Pharmaceutical companies," Sarah said aloud. If Marcus had told anyone, if he'd published his findings, these mountains would have been strip-mined. Every corporation in the world would have fought for access. "So he hid," Rebecca said softly. "He made everyone think he died to protect the discovery." But where did he go? Sarah stared at the lights dancing in the storm. And why leave his notebook behind now? After all these years? A new thought struck her, cold and terrible. "Rebecca, what if the notebook was meant to be found? What if Marcus knew this storm cycle was coming and left clues for someone to follow?" "For you," Rebecca said. "He left them for you, Sarah. You're the only one who knew about his work. The only one he trusted." Lightning split the sky, illuminating the mountains in stark white light. And in that flash, Sarah saw something that made her blood freeze. High on the slopes, in the area where the backpack had been found, the dancing lights had converged into a single point. They were marking something, showing her where to go. After 45 years, Marcus Chen was finally ready to share his secret. But only if Sarah was brave enough to climb into the storm and find it. Jennifer Reeves had spent 15 years making documentaries about unsolved mysteries. She'd investigated cold cases, government conspiracies, and unexplained phenomena. But nothing had ever felt like this. This case had layers. each one darker and more complex than the last. She sat in her hotel room, surrounded by equipment and research materials, reviewing footage from the town hall meeting. Something Gloria Chen had said kept bothering her. When she'd mentioned people who wouldn't want him to share what he found, her eyes had darted toward someone specific in the crowd. Jennifer had caught it on camera. She zoomed in on the frame. There, a man in his 70s, sitting in the back corner. His face was tense, uncomfortable. Jennifer ran his image through facial recognition software connected to public databases. The match came back in seconds. Dr. Harold Vance, former director of the National Institute of Botanical Research. The same institute Marcus had called the night before his disappearance. Jennifer's heart raced. She pulled up everything she could find on Vance. He'd retired in 1995, moved to a small town 2 hours away. But according to property records, he also owned a cabin in the Lone Pine area. Had owned it since 1977, 1 year before Marcus disappeared. This couldn't be a coincidence. She grabbed her phone and called Sarah. "We need to talk. Now. I found something about that phone call Marcus made." 20 minutes later, Sarah and Rebecca sat in Jennifer's hotel room, staring at the evidence spread across the bed. Documents, photos, timeline charts. Jennifer had been busy. Dr. Harold Vance was leading a classified government research program in 1978, Jennifer explained, pulling up documents on her laptop. The official story was they were installing weather monitoring equipment. But I did some digging through declassified archives. The real project was studying potential medical applications of rare plants in extreme environments. They were looking for exactly what Marcus found, Sarah said, her voice hollow. Jennifer nodded. According to these documents, the project was shut down in August 1978. Officially, it was due to budget cuts. But look at the timing. It was shut down the same week Marcus disappeared. Rebecca leaned forward, her detective instincts taking over. "You think Marcus contacted them about his discovery? That he was trying to share his findings with legitimate researchers? I think Marcus was 17 years old and brilliant and naive," Jennifer said. "I think he found something extraordinary and called the one scientific institution he thought could help him protect it and study it properly. But what if they saw it differently? What if they saw a teenage boy sitting on a discovery worth billions? What if the people Marcus trusted were the ones who made him disappear?" Sarah felt sick. "You're saying the government silenced him?" "I'm saying we need to talk to Vance," Jennifer replied. She pulled up one more document, a recent one. "I found something else." In 1979, 1 year after Marcus disappeared, Vance published a groundbreaking paper on plant-based medicinal compounds. The work launched his career. He became one of the most respected botanists in the country. Rebecca grabbed the paper, scanning it quickly. "These formulas, Sarah, don't they look familiar?" Sarah took the paper with trembling hands. As she read, her face went white. The biochemical models, the extraction techniques, even some of the theoretical frameworks, they were nearly identical to what she'd seen in Marcus's notebook. "Word Sunderred, he stole Marcus's research," Sarah whispered. "He published it as his own work." "More than that," Jennifer said, pulling up another document. 3 companies filed patents based on Vance's paper. Medical treatments, extraction processes, all derived from that original research. Those patents have generated hundreds of millions of dollars over the past 45 years. The room fell silent. The magnitude of what they were looking at settled over them like a weight. This wasn't just a missing person case. This was theft, exploitation, possibly even murder. "We need to confront him," Rebecca said, her voice hard. "Now, tonight." "Wait!" Sarah held up a hand. "If Vance knows we're investigating, if he knows we found Marcus's notebook—" She couldn't finish the sentence, but she didn't have to. "He might try to hide evidence," Rebecca finished. "Or worse," Jennifer's phone buzzed. A message from one of her research contacts. She read it and her face went pale. "We might be too late," she said quietly. "Vance left town this morning. According to his neighbor, he packed his car, and drove toward the mountains. She looked up at Sarah and Rebecca. He's going after something, and I think we all know what. The dancing lights, the storm, the 45-year cycle. If Vance knew Marcus's research, he would know that whatever Marcus had found would be accessible again, right now. After all these years of profiting from stolen work, he was going back to the source. And if they didn't stop him, Marcus's life's work, the secret he'd protected for 45 years, would be exploited once again. Sarah couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about the phone call Marcus had made to the Institute. That single call had changed everything. But there was something that didn't add up. If Marcus had been trying to reach researchers at a government facility, why had he called at night? Why the secrecy? At 2 a.m., her phone rang. It was Rebecca. "I can't stop thinking about that phone call," Rebecca said without preamble. "So I drove to town and broke into the municipal archives." "You what?" "I'm a retired detective. I know how to pick locks." There was rustling on the other end, papers being shuffled. The phone records show more than just the number Marcus called. They show the duration. "Sarah, he was on that phone for 47 minutes. That's not a quick call to report a discovery. That's a conversation." Sarah sat up in bed. 47 minutes? I'm looking at the old hotel registry now, too. There's something else. 3 guests checked in that same night. All from out of town. All paid cash. All checked out the next morning, right after Marcus left for his final hike. The pieces were falling into place, but the picture they formed was darker than Sarah had imagined. "Rebecca, what if Marcus didn't just call to report his findings? What if he called to arrange a meeting?" "That's what I'm thinking." More papers rustling. "Wait, there's a note here from the hotel receptionist. She documented it because she thought it was strange." Rebecca read aloud. "Young man seemed nervous. Asked me not to mention his call to anyone. Said it was important for his family's safety." His family's safety. Not his own. His family's. Sarah's mind raced back to that last morning. Marcus's trembling hands. The way he'd looked over his shoulder. The urgency in his voice. He'd known he was putting himself in danger, but he'd thought his family would be safe. "There's more," Rebecca continued. "I found the receptionist. She's in a nursing home now, but her memory is sharp. I called her. She remembers that night because one of those out-of-town guests came down to make a call right after Marcus finished his. And she heard part of the conversation. She heard them say, 'The boy knows too much. We need to contain this before it goes public.'" Sarah felt like she couldn't breathe. Who were they? She doesn't remember names. But she remembered one detail. The man was wearing a badge, a government identification badge. Everything Sarah had believed for 45 years was crumbling. She'd always assumed Marcus had gotten lost in the mountains, that it was an accident, a tragedy. But this was something else entirely. "They were waiting for him," Sarah said, her voice barely a whisper. "He thought he was meeting with scientists who would help him, but they were waiting to silence him." "Sarah, if that's true, if Marcus encountered government agents on that mountain—" Rebecca didn't finish. She didn't have to, but then another thought struck Sarah. "Rebecca, Marcus left that notebook. He left clues. If he'd been killed, if they'd wanted to silence him completely, they would have taken everything. Why leave evidence behind?" "Unless he got away," Rebecca said slowly. "Unless he realized what was happening and ran. Hid. Made everyone think he was dead so they'd stop looking for him." "And he's been out there all this time," Sarah finished. "Hiding. Protecting his discovery. Waiting for the right moment to reveal the truth." The storm outside intensified. Lightning flashed, illuminating Sarah's room in stark white light. On her desk, Marcus's old photograph stared back at her. 17 years old, smiling, holding a plant specimen. She'd looked at that photo thousands of times over 45 years, but now she saw something she'd never noticed before. Behind Marcus in the photo, barely visible in the background, was a structure. A building or cave entrance partially hidden by vegetation. She'd always assumed it was just a random background element. But now, Pulling out her magnifying glass, she could see it more clearly. It wasn't natural. It was man-made, built into the mountainside, and it was in the exact area where the dancing lights had appeared. "Rebecca," Sarah said, her voice shaking, "I think I know where Marcus went. I think I know where he's been hiding for 45 years. What if Marcus Chen had never left the mountain at all?" The morning brought another revelation that would shatter everything they thought they knew. A young woman appeared at Sarah's door just after dawn. She was in her early 20s, with Marcus's distinctive cheekbones and intelligent eyes. She introduced herself as Emma Chen, Marcus's granddaughter. "My grandmother just passed away 2 weeks ago," Emma said, her voice tight with emotion. She carried a weathered shoebox, held against her chest like something precious. "Before she died, she made me promise to bring these here, to the mountain. She said someone would know what to do with them." Sarah invited her in, her heart hammering. Marcus's granddaughter. Which meant Marcus had children. Which meant Emma opened the box. Inside were letters, dozens of them, yellowed with age, tied together with string. "My grandmother received these over the years," Emma explained. "The first one came 6 months after everyone thought my grandfather had died. The last one arrived 5 years ago." Sarah's hands trembled as she untied the string and pulled out the first letter. The handwriting was unmistakably Marcus's. She recognized it from his old notebooks. The date, January 1979. "My dearest Claire," it read. "By now you must think I'm dead. I'm sorry for the pain I've caused. But what I discovered in these mountains, what they were willing to do to control it, I couldn't let them win. I couldn't let them exploit this knowledge for profit while destroying these sacred lands. I had to disappear. Please forgive me. Please understand. And please, never come looking for me. It's the only way to keep you safe. I love you always. M." Sarah looked up at Emma, tears streaming down her face. "Your grandmother knew he was alive?" "She never told anyone," Emma said. "Not even my mother. She kept his secret until the day she died. But she saved every letter, read them. They explain everything." Sarah spread the letters across her table, organizing them by date. Rebecca and Jennifer arrived minutes later, summoned by Sarah's urgent text. Together, they read Marcus's secret life, laid out in his own words across 45 years of letters. The letters revealed a story of survival and dedication. After that fateful phone call to the Institute, Marcus had gone to the mountain to meet what he thought were legitimate researchers. Instead, he'd been confronted by Dr. Vance and 2 security personnel. They'd demanded his notebook, his research, all his findings. When Marcus refused, when he threatened to expose their plans to commercialize and patent discoveries from sacred indigenous lands, they'd tried to detain him. Marcus had run. In the chaos, he dropped his backpack but held on to the most important thing, his complete research notebook, the one with all his detailed findings. He'd hidden in the mountains for weeks, watching as search parties combed the area, knowing he couldn't reveal himself without putting his family in danger. A letter from March 1979 explained his decision. "They told me if I ever surfaced, if I ever tried to publish my findings, they'd make sure my family suffered for it. I believe them, so I've made a choice. I'll continue my research in hiding. I'll protect this knowledge. And someday, when the time is right, when I can ensure these discoveries benefit everyone rather than enriching corporations, I'll reveal everything. But not yet. Not while they're still watching." Later letters described his journey abroad. He'd found allies, scientists who believed in protecting natural resources rather than exploiting them. He'd continued his research, documenting the medicinal properties of the rare plants he'd discovered. He'd built a life in exile, always looking over his shoulder. A letter from 1998. "I've managed to synthesize some of the compounds in laboratory conditions. The potential for treating cancer, Alzheimer's, even certain genetic disorders, it's all here in these plants. But I won't release the information through traditional channels. Too many corporations waiting to patent and profit. I'm working with international conservation groups to establish protected research zones. It's slow work, but it's the only way. The most recent letter, from 5 years ago, was different in tone. Claire, I'm getting old. My health is failing, and I know the cycle is coming again. The 45-year phenomenon. The mountain will reveal its secrets once more. I've left instructions. I've hidden everything in a place only someone who truly understands my work can find. Tell Sarah, if she's still searching, that the answers are in the pattern. Tell her I'm sorry I couldn't trust anyone back then. But maybe, if she's still the brilliant friend I remember, she'll understand why I had to disappear. And maybe she'll be the one to finish what I started. Sarah couldn't speak. For 45 years, she'd carried the guilt of not speaking up. But Marcus had known. He'd known she would keep searching. He'd been counting on it. There's something else, Emma said quietly. She pulled out a final envelope, newer than the others, sealed with wax. Grandmother said to open this only when you'd read all the letters. She said you'd know what it means. Sarah broke the seal with shaking hands. Inside was a single page with coordinates, a date, and a message in Marcus's handwriting. Sarah, if you're reading this, then Claire has passed, and the cycle has returned. I'm coming home. Meet me where the lights dance. Bring only people you trust. It's time to reveal the truth. M. The date was today, and the coordinates matched exactly where the backpack had been found. Marcus Chen was alive, and after 45 years in hiding, he was finally ready to come out of the shadows. Sarah's cabin had transformed into a war room. Maps covered every surface, overlaid with Marcus's coordinates, the locations of the dancing lights, and 45 years of Sarah's botanical observations. Emma had joined their team, bringing her grandmother's archive, decades of letters, photographs, and documents that Marcus had carefully preserved. The key was in the pattern. Marcus had said so in his letter. But what pattern? Sarah stood over her largest map, the one showing the entire Lone Pine Mountain range. She'd marked every location where she'd documented unusual plant growth over the years. Red dots scattered across the mountain's upper slopes, seemingly random. But were they? It's not about the individual locations, Sarah muttered, tracing lines between the dots. It's about the relationship between them. Rebecca placed Marcus's coded map next to Sarah's. The symbols Marcus had drawn matched specific elevation levels and geological features. He was mapping something underground, Rebecca said. Look, these markings follow what looks like a water system. An aquifer, maybe? Jennifer pulled up satellite images on her laptop. There is an underground water system in these mountains. It feeds the springs and streams. But according to geological surveys, there are anomalies. Areas where the water flow doesn't match the expected patterns. Areas that were flagged for further research but never investigated. Because those are the areas Marcus was trying to protect, Sarah said, excitement building. The rare plants don't just grow randomly. They're growing along this specific water system. They need the unique mineral composition, the specific pH levels, conditions that only exist in certain locations. Emma pulled out another of her grandmother's documents, a hand-drawn illustration. Marcus had sent in 1985. It showed the cross-section of a mountain, with root systems reaching deep underground, connecting to a network of caves and water channels. He was documenting an entire ecosystem, Emma said. Not just individual plants, but a complete interconnected system that exists partly underground. That's why the plants only bloom during the 45-year cycle. It's linked to something in the aquifer, a mineral cycle, a biological rhythm in the water system itself. Sarah felt pieces clicking into place in her mind. The dancing lights, she said, they're not supernatural. They're bioluminescent fungi, or plants that bloom in response to changes in the underground water chemistry. Changes that occur every 45 years when this specific storm pattern creates the right conditions. Like a trigger, Rebecca said. The storm changes the atmospheric pressure, which affects the groundwater, which triggers the blooming cycle. Exactly. Sarah traced the water system on the map. And Marcus discovered that the medicinal compounds in these plants are most potent during this bloom period. That's why the indigenous ceremonies were timed to this cycle. They understood intuitively what Marcus proved scientifically. Jennifer was typing rapidly, pulling up more research. Tapu itatu pa. Wait! I'm looking at Dr. Vance's published papers. His breakthrough work on plant-based medicines, it all relates to compounds that are enhanced under specific environmental stress conditions. He was using Marcus's research, but he never had access to the complete ecosystem. He only had the stolen samples, Marcus's initial work. Which means, Rebecca said slowly, he's never been able to replicate the full medicinal properties. He's been working with incomplete data for 45 years. And now the cycle has returned, Sarah finished. He knows this is his only chance in his lifetime to access the complete, potent versions of these plants. He's going to try to harvest them. Emma's face had gone pale. We have to stop him. My grandfather spent his entire life protecting this ecosystem. If Vance harvests these plants during their bloom cycle, if he removes them or damages the underground system, it could destroy the entire 45-year pattern. The plants might never bloom again. Sarah looked at the coordinates Marcus had sent. They led to a cave system in the upper mountain, an area that had been inaccessible during the original search because of rock formations. But according to Marcus's notes, during the specific weather conditions of the storm, a seasonal waterfall would create a natural entrance. He's been living there, Sarah said with certainty, all these years, in a cave system that's only accessible during these storms. That's how he survived. That's where he's been conducting his research. Rebecca checked her watch. The storm is supposed to peak tonight. If Marcus's timeline is accurate, that waterfall entrance will be accessible for maybe 72 hours at most before the conditions change again. Then that's our window, Sarah said. She looked at her team, a retired detective, a documentary filmmaker, and the granddaughter of a man who'd been dead for 45 years. We climb tonight. We find Marcus, and we stop Vance from destroying everything Marcus has protected. But as she said it, Sarah's phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. The text was simple, chilling. I know you've been investigating. I know about the letters. If you want to see Marcus Chen alive, don't interfere with my work tonight. He's hidden for 45 years. He can stay hidden forever. Vance! The threat was clear. This wasn't just about protecting an ecosystem anymore. Marcus's life was in danger, and they had less than 12 hours to save him. What would you do? Risk everything for the truth or back down to save a life? They decided to climb despite the threat. Some truths were worth the risk. At 11 p.m., under the cover of storm and darkness, Sarah, Rebecca, Jennifer, and Emma began their ascent into the Lone Pine Mountains. Each carried climbing gear, lights, and Sarah's detailed maps. The rain had eased slightly, but the wind still howled through the peaks like a warning. Sarah's legs ached with every step. At 62, she wasn't as strong as she'd been during her decades of solo expeditions, but determination pushed her forward. Somewhere up here, Marcus was alive. Her friend. The boy she'd failed to save. The man who'd trusted only her with his secret. The waterfall should be just ahead, Sarah called over the wind. According to her calculations, the seasonal flow would have begun hours ago, and the path behind it would now be accessible. They rounded a rocky outcrop, and there it was, a magnificent waterfall, perhaps 30 feet tall, cascading down the mountain face. The water glowed faintly blue in their headlamps. Bioluminescence, just as Marcus had described. Behind the waterfall, barely visible through the curtain of water, was a dark opening. Satutinophone. There, Emma breathed. That's it. That's where my grandfather has been. Rebecca tested the rocks leading behind the waterfall. Slippery, but manageable. Stay close. Watch your footing. One by one, they made their way behind the cascading water. The sound was deafening, blocking out everything else. Sarah's heart pounded as she stepped through the opening and into the cave beyond. Her headlamp illuminated a sight that took her breath away. The cave was massive, much larger than it appeared from outside. But more incredibly, it was filled with life. Bioluminescent plants covered the walls, casting everything in an otherworldly blue-green glow. Fungi in shapes Sarah had never seen before grew in intricate patterns. The air smelled earthy and alive, rich with the scent of growing things. And there, deeper in the cave, was evidence of human habitation. A small camping setup, equipment, shelves carved into the stone walls, lined with jars and specimens. A desk made from a flat rock covered in notebooks and papers. "This is incredible," Jennifer whispered, her camera capturing everything. "This is a working laboratory. He's been conducting research here for decades." Emma moved toward the desk, her hand trembling as she touched one of the notebooks. "These are all in my grandfather's handwriting. All these years of work." But Sarah had noticed something else. The cave extended further back, branching into multiple tunnels, and from one of those tunnels came a faint glow. Not the blue of the bioluminescent plants, but the warm yellow of electric light. "Someone's here," Rebecca said, her hand moving to the weapon she still carried from her police days. "Everyone stay behind me." They moved deeper into the cave system, following the light. The tunnel opened into another chamber, larger than the first. This one had been modified extensively. Reinforced walls, a proper laboratory setup with microscopes and equipment that looked far more sophisticated than the camping setup in the first chamber. And in the center of it all, bent over a work table, was a man. He turned at the sound of their footsteps, 82 years old, with white hair and wrinkled skin, but with eyes that were unmistakably the same. Brilliant, intense, filled with a hunger for knowledge. "Hello, Sarah," Marcus Chen said. "I've been waiting for you." Sarah couldn't speak, couldn't move, couldn't breathe. 45 years of guilt, grief, and searching collapsed in on her all at once. Tears streamed down her face. "Grandpa," Emma whispered, stepping forward. "It's me, Emma, Claire's granddaughter." Marcus's eyes filled with tears. "You look just like her, just like your grandmother." His voice broke. "Is she?" "She passed 2 weeks ago," Emma said gently. "But she loved you until the very end. She kept all your letters. She kept your secret." Marcus nodded slowly, grief and love warring on his face. Then he looked back at Sarah. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm sorry I made you carry that burden for so long. But I couldn't trust anyone else. And I couldn't risk—" The sound of rocks falling echoed from the entrance tunnel. All of them froze. "He's here," Marcus said, his face going pale. "Vance, I knew he would come tonight. He's been watching these mountains for years, waiting for this cycle to return." Rebecca moved toward the tunnel entrance, weapon drawn. "How many people does he have with him?" "2, Marcus said. "Former security contractors. He hired them years ago. The same men who tried to capture me in 1978. They've been waiting as long as I have." From the tunnel came voices, growing closer. Dr. Harold Vance emerged into the laboratory chamber, flanked by 2 large men carrying flashlights and what looked like collection equipment. Vance was in his 70s now, but his eyes still held that calculating coldness Sarah had seen in his old photographs. "Marcus," Vance said, smiling coldly. "After all these years, you're still alive. I had wondered." He looked around the laboratory. "Impressive setup. You've been busy. I assume you've completed the research you started back in '78? "You're not getting it," Marcus said firmly. "This ecosystem, these plants, they don't belong to you or any corporation. They belong to these mountains, to the people who've protected them for generations." Vance laughed. "Still naive after all these years. You could have been rich, Marcus, famous. Instead, you hid in a cave like an animal." He gestured to his men. "Search everything. Take all the notebooks, all the samples. We're finally going to finish what we started 45 years ago." But as his men moved forward, Rebecca raised her weapon. "I don't think so. I'm a retired police detective, and you're trespassing on protected land. More importantly, you're threatening witnesses to historical crimes, attempted kidnapping, theft of research, and potentially attempted murder. Vance's smile didn't falter. And who's going to believe you? A crazy old woman who's been obsessed with this case for decades? A missing person who everyone thinks is dead? Please. He pulled out his phone. One call to my lawyers, and this all disappears. Just like it did in 1978. But Jennifer had been filming everything. Actually, she said, stepping forward with her camera, this is all being live-streamed to my documentary channel. 50,000 people are watching right now, including several journalists I contacted before we climbed up here. So please, Dr. Vance, tell those lawyers exactly how you plan to make this disappear. Vance's face went white. His eyes darted to the camera, to Rebecca's weapon, to the tunnel entrance behind him. The calculation was clear. He was trapped, and he knew it. This isn't over, he spat. That research belongs to science, to humanity. You can't keep it hidden forever. You're right, Marcus said quietly. It does belong to humanity. But humanity doesn't mean corporations and patents and profit. It means protecting these gifts from nature so that future generations can benefit from them properly, under the right conditions, with respect and care. He turned to Sarah. That's why I needed you here. You've spent 45 years documenting this ecosystem. You understand it. You respect it. You're the one who can make sure my research is shared the right way, not through pharmaceutical companies, but through open-source scientific communities, through partnerships with indigenous groups who've protected this knowledge for centuries. Sarah found her voice at last. You're asking me to finish what you started. I'm asking you to do what I couldn't, Marcus said. To bring this knowledge into the light, but in a way that protects rather than exploits. To honor the promise you made me 45 years ago. The promise to keep the secret until it was safe to share. Through the cave entrance, the sound of sirens echoed. Rebecca's emergency call had brought help. But more than that, it had brought witnesses. Officials who would have to acknowledge what had been hidden for so long. The truth was finally coming out, and this time, no one could make it disappear. Dawn broke over the Lone Pine Mountains as police and federal agents secured the cave system. Marcus's decades-long sanctuary had become a crime scene, an archaeological site, and a scientific marvel all at once. Jennifer's live stream had been viewed by over 2 million people, and news crews from around the world were already arriving in the small mountain town. But for Sarah, none of that mattered as much as the hours she spent with Marcus in his laboratory, finally understanding the work he'd dedicated his life to. The cave system was far more extensive than anyone had imagined. Marcus had spent 45 years not just hiding, but building. Multiple chambers served different purposes, some for cultivating and studying the rare bioluminescent plants, others for synthesizing and testing medicinal compounds, still others for documentation and preservation. I've discovered compounds that could revolutionize treatment for Alzheimer's, certain cancers, even some genetic disorders, Marcus explained, showing Sarah meticulously documented research that spanned decades. But I couldn't release them through traditional channels. Not after what happened with Vance. He pulled out a journal from 1985. I tried once. I sent anonymous research proposals to several universities. Within a month, 3 pharmaceutical companies had filed provisional patents based on my theoretical work. They were trying to own discoveries they hadn't even proven yet, just based on possibilities I'd described. Sarah read through his notes, amazed by the depth and sophistication of his work. You did all this alone? Not entirely, Marcus smiled. I had help over the years. Scientists I met abroad who believed in protecting natural resources. Indigenous knowledge keepers who taught me things Western science is only beginning to understand. And Claire, my wife, she was my connection to the outside world. She helped me obtain supplies, relay messages, stay hidden. Emma was examining samples under one of Marcus's microscopes. Grandpa, These molecular structures, some of this shouldn't be possible with 1970s technology. How did you— Necessity, Marcus said. And time. When you have 45 years to perfect your techniques, you learn to work with very simple tools in very sophisticated ways. He gestured to equipment that looked primitive by modern standards, but had been modified with ingenious adaptations. The mountains taught me patience. Nature works slowly. Real science should too. Rebecca was documenting everything for the official investigation. Dr. Vance is being held for questioning. His research facility is being searched. It looks like he's been selling compounds derived from your original work under fraudulent patents for decades. The financial crimes alone could put him away for the rest of his life. I don't care about punishing him, Marcus said quietly. I care about making sure this knowledge is shared correctly. That these plants are protected. That the indigenous communities who've stewarded these lands for generations have a say in how their resources are studied and used. Sarah understood then what Marcus was really asking her to do. You want to create a new model for research, one that respects both scientific discovery and traditional knowledge. That puts conservation and community benefit ahead of corporate profit. Exactly. Marcus pulled out a thick folder, his life's work, distilled into a comprehensive proposal. I've been working on this framework for years. Open-source research protocols, community-controlled resource management, equitable benefit sharing with indigenous groups. I just needed the right moment to release it, and the right person to champion it. Why me? Sarah asked, though she thought she knew the answer. Because you never gave up, Marcus said simply. You kept your promise. You spent your life searching for truth, not profit. You respected the mountains. You earned the trust of this community. And you're one of the most respected botanists in the field. If you present this research, people will listen. Sarah looked around the laboratory, at decades of careful work, at discoveries that could change millions of lives, at a man who'd sacrificed everything to protect knowledge until it could be shared responsibly. The 45-year cycle, she said. That's the key, isn't it? These plants are most potent during the bloom period, but they need time to regenerate between cycles. Any attempt to harvest them commercially would destroy the ecosystem. Precisely. Marcus showed her growth pattern charts. The indigenous ceremonies weren't just spiritual. They were practical. Take only what you need. Give the land time to recover. Work with natural cycles instead of against them. My research proves what they've known for centuries. You can't rush nature without destroying it. A commotion at the cave entrance interrupted them. Officials were arguing with a group of people, Thomas Whitehorse and several elders from the indigenous community, along with dozens of town residents. They'd hiked up at dawn, demanding to be part of whatever was happening. Marcus smiled. Let them in. This has always been their story, too. As the community members filed into the laboratory, their faces showed awe, vindication, and something deeper, recognition. They'd always known the mountains held secrets. They'd always known the old ways held wisdom. Now science had proven what their ancestors had taught them. Thomas Whitehorse approached Marcus, his weathered face solemn. You protected the mountain's gift, he said. You honored the sacred cycle. For that, you have our respect. He turned to Sarah. And you searched with an open heart. You're ready to receive what the mountain wants to share. In that moment, Sarah understood that this wasn't just about Marcus's return or scientific discovery. It was about reconciliation between different ways of knowing, between traditional wisdom and modern science, between exploitation and stewardship. Marcus had spent 45 years building bridges between these worlds. Now, it was Sarah's turn to help others cross them. Outside, the storm was clearing. The dancing lights were fading as the 45-year phenomenon came to an end. But the real work, the work of sharing Marcus's discoveries responsibly and protecting the ecosystem for future cycles, was only beginning. Are you ready for this? Marcus asked Sarah. She looked at her friend, 17 years old in her memories, 82 in reality, but still carrying that same hunger for truth in his eyes. She thought about 45 years of searching, of guilt, of determination, and she realized it had all been preparing her for this moment. "Yes," Sarah said, "I'm ready." 6 months later, Sarah stood before a packed auditorium at the National Institute for Scientific Cooperation. Her presentation had been titled The Lone Pine Discovery. It's a new framework for ethical, bioprospecting, and community-centered research. But everyone knew it as the Marcus Chen case, the mystery that had captivated the world. The audience included scientists, indigenous leaders, government officials, and representatives from conservation organizations worldwide. And sitting in the front row, finally able to attend a public event without fear, was Marcus Chen himself. Sarah's presentation outlined everything they'd discovered: the 45-year bloom cycle, the bioluminescent plants and their medicinal properties, the underground ecosystem that made it all possible. But more importantly, she presented Marcus's framework for how such discoveries should be handled, with respect, patience, and community partnership. The research had been published in a groundbreaking open-source format. No patents, no corporate ownership. Instead, the knowledge was shared freely with strict conservation protocols. Indigenous communities would control access to the plants during bloom cycles. Scientific research would proceed only with community approval and under sustainable harvesting guidelines. Any commercial applications would require equitable benefit sharing with the communities who'd protected this knowledge for generations. Dr. Marcus Chen spent 45 years perfecting not just his scientific understanding, but his ethical framework, Sarah concluded. He understood that some knowledge comes with responsibility. That true scientific progress means working with communities, not exploiting them. That patience and respect yield better results than profit and speed. The reaction was overwhelming. Standing ovation, questions that lasted for hours, partnerships proposed with universities and conservation groups worldwide. But the most meaningful moment came afterward, when Thomas Whitehorse approached Sarah and Marcus. "The elders have discussed your proposal," he said. "We want to establish a research station near the caves, one that combines traditional knowledge with modern science. We want our young people to learn both ways of understanding the mountains, and we want you both to help lead it." Marcus's eyes filled with tears. This was what he'd dreamed of. Knowledge shared, traditions honored, science and wisdom working together. Emma had flown in for the presentation. She'd decided to pursue a doctorate in ethnobotany, inspired by her grandfather's work. "I want to make sure your legacy continues," she'd told Marcus. "That your story inspires a new generation of scientists who think about ethics as much as discovery." Rebecca had received recognition from the FBI for her investigation into Dr. Vance's decades of fraud. The former researcher was facing multiple charges, and hundreds of millions in fraudulent patents were being revoked. More importantly, the case had sparked a nationwide conversation about research ethics and indigenous rights. Jennifer's documentary, The 45-Year Secret, had won awards and brought international attention to the importance of protecting natural resources and traditional knowledge. But she was already working on a follow-up, documenting the establishment of the new research center and the community partnerships being formed. As for Sarah, she'd finally found redemption. The guilt she'd carried for 45 years had transformed into purpose. She'd kept her promise to Marcus. She'd protected his secret until it was safe to share. And now, she was helping ensure that his life's work would benefit humanity in exactly the way he'd intended. That evening, Sarah and Marcus hiked partway up the Lone Pine Mountains, not to the caves, which were now protected research sites, but to a viewpoint where they could see the entire range. "Do you regret it?" Sarah asked. "Giving up your life? Your family? 45 years in hiding?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, looking at the mountains that had been his home and his prison. "I regret the pain I caused Claire. the years I missed with my children and grandchildren. But the work, the sacrifice to protect this knowledge until the world was ready for it? He shook his head. No, some things are worth protecting, even at great personal cost. The lights will come back, Sarah said. In another 45 years, the cycle will repeat. And this time, Marcus said, there will be researchers ready to study them properly. With respect, with patience, building on our foundation. He looked at Sarah. You'll make sure of that. We'll make sure of it, Sarah corrected. Together. As the sun set over the mountains, painting them in shades of gold and purple, Sarah thought about the journey that had brought them here. A 17-year-old boy with a notebook. A best friend who kept a promise. 45 years of searching, hiding, and protecting. And finally, a truth that could heal rather than harm. The dancing lights would return one day. The rare plants would bloom again. The mountains would continue their ancient cycles, now protected by a partnership between science and tradition, between innovation and wisdom, between discovery and respect. Marcus Chen had spent 45 years proving that some mysteries are worth preserving, that some knowledge requires patience, that real science isn't about rushing to publish or profit, but about understanding deeply and sharing responsibly. And Sarah had learned that keeping a promise, even one that causes pain, can sometimes lead to the most important truths of all. In the distance, though the 45-year bloom had ended, Sarah could have sworn she saw a faint flicker of light on the mountain peak. A reminder, a promise, a whisper from the mountains that some secrets were worth the wait. If this story left you as impacted as it did me, don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel and comment your opinion below. Each comment is like a new piece that can help unravel other mysteries like this one. Because sometimes, the greatest discoveries aren't found in laboratories or libraries. They're found in the mountains that refuse to give up their secrets easily, in friendships that endure decades of silence. Promises kept when breaking them would have been so much easier. The truth about Marcus Chen wasn't just about what he discovered. It was about what he protected. And now, that protection continues. Not through secrecy, but through understanding. Not through hiding, but through sharing wisely. The mountain mystery was never really about a disappearance. It was about what we're willing to sacrifice for knowledge that benefits everyone, not just those with the power to profit from it. It was about finding the courage to wait for the right moment, even when that moment takes 45 years to arrive. And that's a lesson worth remembering, no matter what mysteries we're trying to solve in our own lives.